Hi, this is 72 Daystar, and welcome to my steering column. It's a little windy out today, so I didn't want to do a walk-in vlog. My point today, never underestimate the power of incredulity. If someone's determined not to believe something, they will succeed. One of the key devices that they use, one of the key strategies rather that they use, is to superficially deal with the arguments of their opponents. Now, that happens because quite often they're more interested in just reiterating or going further on with their own argument and really are not interested in understanding the argument of your opponent, because after all, if you're right, then there's no point in trying to see where the other person's coming from, unless you actually want to understand their point of view. But that's a rare occurrence. I would even admit for myself, I've been in too many engagements on the internet to not form some prejudices when I do encounter someone on the internet and I say, oh, you're from that point of view. Okay, great. And then I'm often a little dismissive. That happens. So, I have to recognize that there is this tendency in myself at times. However, I think I would be an exception in this respect. If I want to, if I have the time and energy or interest or it's amusing, and I disagree with someone, I can bring to bear some analytical thinking on their arguments. That is, I can deal with their arguments and show that I understand where they're coming from and why they're wrong. Now, in other cases where people just disagree with their opponent, they often are not able to do that, and they are, even when called out. Last week I had an encounter with someone, and I said, look, you're not dealing with my arguments. In the extent that he was dealing with my arguments was to say, your arguments are wrong. That's wrong. What you're saying there is wrong. But not actually given reasons and evidence why they were wrong. And that's kind of crucial. And for example, I have, an occasion when I wasn't really interested in elaborating on it, said that the arguments of William Lane Craig, specifically on the Kalam cosmological argument, are sophistry and unsound. And if that's all I said, I would not be dealing with the argument. So when someone claims that they're dealing with the argument and all they're really doing is dismissing it, they're not dealing with the argument. To deal with the argument, I would have to actually say something more than, oh, it's philosophical sophistry. I would have to say, oh, okay, perhaps I could take this approach. There are several approaches you could take. Just because everything in the universe requires a cause. Do you know his argument, William Lane Craig's? Everything that begins to exist needs a cause of its existence. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And then he goes on to find his way through a forest of reasoning back to the God of the Bible. Point being, well, I would say that just because the things of the universe require a cause, and I might agree with that, it doesn't necessarily follow, or it doesn't follow, that the universe itself, that would be a composition fallacy. Here I am dealing with the argument. Just call it sophistry is not dealing with the argument, but it seems that for the incredulous, the people who have taken one step beyond skepticism, maybe not one step, maybe several steps, beyond skepticism, healthy skepticism, and into the realm of incredulity, just a lack of willingness of believing anything. The other dimension of this is someone amazingly cunning has convinced mostly unbelievers, but the thing is, last week I was talking to a guy who was claiming to be an agnostic, but he embraced this same sort of mental defense, and it goes like this. It's justifiable to disbelieve something like evolution because it has not been proven. And when they say proven, if you press them on what proven means, basically they're looking for a deductive sort of proof, like you would find in math and logic and few other places, axiomatic truths. Now, beyond math, beyond the the immediate contents of my brain and my thoughts that I'm actively working with, and given some axiomatic rules for reasoning, I can make conclusions that I would say are as certain. Let's just go with certain. Outside in the real world, when we're talking about things that are happening there, we have to use inference, and we have to make conclusions about what is most likely true and most likely not true on the basis of these inferences. Now, there's a whole spectrum of strength in these sorts of arguments. But just about at the top of that spectrum of strength of inference arguments is something like the argument or the theory of evolution and the evidence that supports it and the reasoning that supports it. And yet, just because it doesn't live up to this sort of truth that we can find nearly only in axiomatic situations or the immediate experience of my consciousness, that it doesn't merit being called certain or being called a fact. And I think that is another dimension and a major coup that has allowed some people to take advantage of the credulity of a large number of people. How else? What other devices? There's two dimensions there. Taking advantage of this idea that they think if something's true, it should be deductively true. This is why Galileo got in trouble back in the day, is he could only show an inferential argument about his conclusions about the structure of the solar system. He couldn't give a deductive one, and therefore he was dismissed. This is the history where people, when they want to establish something as true or not true, they turn to this criterion of certainty by deduction. It's a very enticing sort of approach, and it works very well for the religious to keep them religious. And the other dimension is just being superficial. Not really looking at the argument of your opponents in an analytical way, in any way that would show that you understood it. That is to be dismissive. I think those are packaged in one. So out of those two groups, if you could add any, what are the defenses that people use to maintain their belief? What are the defenses that people use in order to fend off any information that might be troubling for their current belief system? So if you could add any thoughts like that below, I'd appreciate it. 72 Daystar, out.